satellite scan showed a perfect square buried 30 meters beneath the desert. Nothing from ancient Egypt was ever built that deep. At first, everyone assumed it was an error, interference, bad calibration, maybe leftover military infrastructure from the 20th century. The plateau west of Saqqara had been surveyed countless times, and no archaeological records mentioned a structure there. But the shape was too precise. 4 straight walls, exact 90-degree angles, no collapse lines, no erosion signatures. Whoever built it to last. I wasn't an archaeologist. I was there to maintain the scanning equipment. Ground-penetrating radar arrays, seismic rigs, the kind of gear most excavation teams couldn't afford. The project was funded quietly through a private research grant, which meant the people running it weren't interested in publicity. They wanted results, and they wanted them fast. The desert that week felt heavier than usual. Wind moved slowly across the sand, dragging long shadows from the excavation lights. Generators hummed day and night, vibrating through the ground like distant thunder. 3 days after we arrived, the drilling began. At first, it felt routine. Sand cleared away, survey markers hammered into the earth, tents set up in neat rows. But as we dug deeper, the soil changed. Layers of limestone gave way to something darker, smoother. The drill bit stopped throwing dust and began throwing sparks. That was when Dr. Halim ordered the heavy floodlights turned on. He crouched beside the trench, brushing away sand with bare hands despite the heat. I remember how quiet he got when the first section of wall emerged. It wasn't carved like Egyptian stone. There were no tool marks, no chisel grooves, just a flat, dark surface that swallowed light instead of reflecting it. Someone whispered behind me, "Basalt." Halim shook his head slowly. "Too smooth," he said, "and too deep." We kept digging. Within hours, the square shape from the scan started to match reality. A perfectly straight edge ran across the trench, cutting through layers of earth that should have buried anything beyond recognition. The deeper we went, the colder the air felt, even with the sun overhead. By evening, we exposed the first opening. Not a doorway, more like a seam, a narrow vertical line in the wall, almost invisible unless the light hit it at the right angle. No hieroglyphs, no ornamentation, just geometry. The team gathered around it in silence. Someone joked that we'd found a bunker. Another said maybe a Cold War installation nobody knew about. But no one laughed for long. The seam stretched higher than the trench walls, disappearing into shadow. And it hummed. Not loudly, just enough to feel in your teeth. Halim ordered the portable generator rolled closer. As power surged through the equipment, the seam flickered. A thin glow traced its edges, pale and steady, like something waking up after centuries of sleep. The wall slid open without a sound. Cool air rushed out, carrying a dry metallic scent that didn't belong in the desert. Inside was darkness. Not the kind you get from a cave or a tomb. This felt deeper, layered, as if the light itself struggled to move forward. We lowered a camera first. The live feed appeared on a tablet beside me, a narrow corridor sloping downward at a gentle angle. The walls weren't carved with symbols or paintings. Instead, faint geometric patterns repeated endlessly, each one cut with impossible precision. No dust, no debris, as if the place had sealed itself away from time. Halim turned to the crew and said quietly, We go in at first light. No one argued. That night the wind picked up. Sand scraped against the tents like static, and the generators struggled to keep a steady rhythm. I sat outside with the equipment racks, watching the excavation lights flicker across the trench. The open seam looked like a black scar in the earth, swallowing everything around it. One of the grad students, Layla, came to sit beside me. She didn't say much, just stared toward the opening. "Does it bother you?" she asked finally. "What?" "That it doesn't look Egyptian." I shrugged. "Maybe we just found something older." She shook her head. "No," she said. "Older things don't look cleaner. They look worn." We listened to the generators for a while. Then, faintly, the hum from below changed pitch. Just for a second. Like a machine shifting gears far beneath the sand. At dawn, we entered the structure. 6 of us, helmets on, lights cutting narrow tunnels through the darkness. The temperature dropped immediately, cool enough to fog the inside of my visor. Our footsteps echoed strangely, as if the corridor stretched far beyond what we could see. The floor sloped downward, smooth and slightly curved. No dust gathered there. No footprints. Halfway down, we reached the first chamber. Rows of tall black pillars rose from the floor, each covered in the same repeating patterns as the walls. Thin lines of pale light moved slowly across their surfaces, pulsing like a heartbeat. Dr. Halim stepped forward, hand hovering just above one of the pillars. "Not a tomb," he whispered. "Not even a temple." "What is it then?" someone asked. He didn't answer, because at the far end of the chamber, another corridor descended deeper, steeper this time, disappearing into a glow that didn't come from our lights. And the hum grew louder, not threatening, just immense. We moved toward it slowly, every instinct telling us we were walking into something that wasn't meant to be found. The second level changed everything. The corridor opened into a vast circular space carved perfectly into the bedrock. A ring of tall structures surrounded a central pit that dropped straight into darkness. Thick cables, or something like cables, ran along the floor, converging at the edge of the pit before vanishing below. Our lights barely reached the bottom. One of the engineers scanned the walls with a handheld sensor. The readings came back strange. No heat signatures, no radiation spikes, just a constant low-frequency vibration traveling upward from beneath us. "That's not natural," he muttered. Layla walked closer to the pit, kneeling near the edge. "It's not a chamber," she said slowly. "It's pointing downward." Halim nodded. "A monitoring station," he said. "Or a receiver." "For what?" He stared into the darkness for a long time before answering. "I think they were listening to something under the desert." The hum rose slightly, vibrating through the floor, and far below us, something shifted. Not a sound, not a movement we could see, just a pressure in the air, as if the ground itself had taken a slow breath. No one spoke after that. We all felt it. Whatever this place was, it hadn't been abandoned. It had been waiting. No one wanted to admit they felt it, but the air in that chamber had changed. The hum wasn't just background noise anymore. It moved through the floor in slow waves, steady and deliberate, like machinery buried miles beneath us. The deeper lights along the walls began to pulse faintly, not in rhythm with our equipment, but with whatever was far below. Halim ordered a perimeter scan. 2 of the engineers unpacked seismic sensors and placed them along the ring of pillars. The readings appeared on a handheld screen, lines of data flickering across the display. I leaned over one of their shoulders as the numbers stabilized. "Depth estimate?" I asked. He swallowed. "Hard to tell. The signal keeps reflecting, like it's bouncing through layers." "How deep?" He hesitated. "Kilometers." The word hung in the air longer than anyone liked. We weren't standing above a chamber or a tomb. We were standing above something enormous. We moved slowly around the circular room, documenting everything. The pillars weren't decorative. They were instruments. Thin grooves ran along their surfaces, converging at points that aligned perfectly with the pit at the center. Layla traced one of the grooves with her gloved hand. "These aren't hieroglyphs," she said. "They're measurements." "What kind?" someone asked. She didn't answer immediately. Her light moved along the wall, revealing a sequence of shapes repeating in precise intervals. Triangles nested inside squares, lines intersecting at perfect angles. "Frequency," she said finally, "or resonance." The hum deepened, vibrating through my boots. We all looked toward the pit again. A faint glow flickered far below, too distant to see clearly. Halim stepped closer to the edge, raising his helmet light. "Lower the drone," he said. One of the engineers unpacked a small quadcopter, its rotors whispering softly as it lifted into the air. The live feed appeared on a tablet strapped to his arm. The drone descended slowly into the darkness. 10 meters, 20, 30. The walls of the shaft remained perfectly smooth, the same dark material as above. No cracks, no erosion, no sign of excavation tools. Just an endless descent carved with impossible precision. At 60 meters, the glow intensified. A circular platform came into view, not the bottom, just an intermediate level carved into the side of the shaft. Tall structures ringed the platform, identical to the pillars above but larger, their surfaces rippling with faint light. The hum grew louder through the drone's microphone. "Is that machinery?" someone asked. Halim didn't respond. The drone dipped lower, and then the signal glitched. The screen filled with static for a heartbeat before stabilizing again. But the image had changed. The glow below wasn't stationary. It moved in slow, sweeping arcs, like light reflecting off something vast and curved. The engineer adjusted the controls, pushing the drone further down. "Careful," Halim warned. The drone reached 90 meters before the feed froze. Not cut, not lost, frozen. As if time itself had stopped on that frame. We stared at the image. A massive structure filled the shaft below, its surface smooth and dark, covered in faint geometric lines that pulsed outward like waves. It wasn't rock, it wasn't machinery. It looked constructed, and it extended far beyond the limits of the camera. The drone feed snapped back to life, just long enough for the microphone to pick up a deep resonance that rattled through our headsets. Then the signal died completely. No one spoke for several seconds. Halim finally exhaled slowly. "We stop here for today." Relief washed through the group, though no one admitted it. The descent had gone deeper than any of us expected. We'd come looking for a buried chamber, not a vertical shaft leading into something that dwarfed anything built by human hands. We began packing equipment, moving carefully along the ring. That was when the lights along the pillars shifted color. Not brighter, not dimmer, just different. A colder tone, almost blue. Layla noticed first. They weren't doing that before, she said. The hum changed pitch again, lower now, heavier. I felt it in my chest more than my ears. Halim looked back toward the corridor we'd entered from. Everyone out, he said quietly. Now. No panic, just urgency. We moved quickly but carefully toward the exit ramp, boots echoing against the smooth floor. The air felt thicker with each step, pressing down on us, as if the desert itself was settling above our heads. Halfway up the ramp, one of the seismic sensors began to beep rapidly. The engineer checked the screen and went pale. Movement, he said. Where? Halim asked. He hesitated. Below us. Not a quake, not a collapse. A slow, steady shift deep beneath the shaft. Something massive changing position. The hum rose sharply, filling the corridor with vibration. Lights along the walls flickered in rapid pulses, racing ahead of us toward the surface. We didn't run. Running would have meant admitting fear, but we moved faster. The seam at the entrance stood open, desert sunlight spilling through the darkness like a lifeline. Sand blew across the trench outside, carrying heat and noise that suddenly felt reassuringly normal. As we stepped back into the open air, the hum dropped instantly to a distant murmur. Behind us, the seam slid shut without a sound. The wall became smooth again, featureless, silent, as if nothing had ever opened there. That night, the camp felt different. No one joked. No one speculated about lost civilizations or secret bunkers anymore. We sat around the equipment racks reviewing footage frame by frame, trying to make sense of what the drone had captured before the signal cut out. Layla paused the recording on the frozen image. The massive structure in the shaft filled the screen, its surface covered in faint lines that formed patterns too precise to be natural. It wasn't pointed upward, she said softly. Halim nodded. It was pointed down. Listening? He looked toward the dark horizon, where the desert stretched endlessly under the stars. Monitoring, he said, or containing. The generators hummed behind us, and somewhere beneath the sand, far below the buried structure we'd uncovered, the ground shifted again, slow enough that only the seismic sensors noticed. The numbers on the screen crept upward. Depth readings fluctuated, and a new signal appeared, steady, rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. No one slept much that night, because for the first time since we arrived, it didn't feel like we had discovered something ancient. It felt like we had interrupted something that was still working. The helicopters arrived just after sunrise. We heard them before we saw them. A deep rhythmic thud rolling across the plateau, scattering sand into the air. 2 dark aircraft dropped low over the camp and settled beyond the excavation trench, their rotors blasting heat and dust across the tents. They weren't part of the original project. No logos, no markings, just mud paint that swallowed the light. Halim watched them land without speaking. I saw the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands stayed clasped behind his back as 3 figures stepped out into the desert. Suits, not field gear, moving like they already owned the place. One of them carried a metal case no bigger than a toolbox. They didn't introduce themselves. They just asked for the data. Inside the operations tent, the footage from the drone played on a large monitor. The frozen frame of the structure below filled the screen, smooth, curved, impossibly large. The tallest of the newcomers studied it silently. "How long has it been active?" he asked. Halim hesitated. "We don't know that it is." The man didn't look away from the screen. "It is," he said flatly. "Your seismic data confirms it." Layla crossed her arms. "Then you already knew what was down there." He ignored her. The metal case opened with a quiet click. Inside were compact sensor modules. Sleek, black devices with interfaces none of us recognized. He placed one gently on the table beside our equipment. "We're upgrading the monitoring array," he said. "Effective immediately." No one argued, but the air in the tent felt heavier. By afternoon, new cables ran from the trench to the operations tent, linking the buried structure directly to the unfamiliar equipment. The hum beneath the ground deepened as power surged through the sensors, vibrating through the soles of our boots. The seam reopened without needing to be touched. This time, the glow along its edges was brighter, colder. We descended again. The circular chamber felt different. The pillars pulsed steadily now, synchronized with the new monitoring equipment above. Data streamed across handheld screens, lines of numbers scrolling faster than anyone could read. One of the newcomers, a woman with a calm, distant expression, walked straight to the edge of the pit. "They've never stopped listening," she said quietly. Halim frowned. "Who?" She didn't answer. Instead, she nodded toward the engineers to deploy a heavier drone. Larger, fitted with stronger lights, and a reinforced signal relay. The drone lifted and descended into the shaft. The feed stabilized immediately, sharper than before. The intermediate platform we'd seen earlier passed beneath the camera, its pillars glowing faintly. Below that, the massive structure came into view again. Only this time, it was clearer. It wasn't just a surface, it was layered. Vast curved panels intersecting at precise angles, each covered in the same geometric patterns that lined the chamber walls above. And along its surface ran thin lines of light, flowing slowly downward like liquid. "Is it moving?" someone whispered. The woman shook her head. "No," she said. "It's responding." To what? She didn't explain. The drone circled lower, mapping the contours of the structure. A new detail emerged. A wide circular opening along one side, partially hidden in shadow. It looked like an entry point, or a vent. Halim leaned closer to the screen. That wasn't visible before. The newcomer beside him spoke without emotion. "It opened when your equipment powered up." A silence settled over the chamber. Layla stared at the image, eyes narrowed. "You knew this would happen." No response. The drone moved closer to the opening. Inside was darkness, not empty, but dense, filled with faint particulate light that drifted slowly upward. The hum shifted pitch again, resonating through the chamber walls. The signal flickered once, then stabilized. And for a moment, the drone's lights reflected off something far inside the opening. Not a shape, not a creature, just a surface, vast and curved, shifting slowly like tectonic plates grinding deep beneath the earth. The engineer controlling the drone froze. "Did you see that?" Halim nodded slowly. "Bring it back up," he said. But the newcomer shook her head. "Keep descending." Her voice carried authority no one questioned. The drone dipped further into the opening. Data readings spiked, low-frequency waves pulsing outward from the structure below. The numbers on the seismic display climbed rapidly, rising beyond the limits of our earlier scans. Layla stepped back from the edge. "It's not a building," she said quietly. "No," Halim replied. "It's a receiver," the newcomer corrected. The hum surged, loud enough now that dust along the chamber floor trembled in tiny ripples. Lights along the pillars flashed in rapid sequences, patterns racing upward toward the surface, like signals being transmitted. And deep below, the massive structure shifted again, slow, deliberate, as if something far beneath it had turned its attention upward. We didn't stay much longer after that. Orders came quickly. Increase monitoring, no further descent, maintain distance from the shaft edge. The drone returned, its lights dimming as it rose into the chamber, carrying footage none of us fully understood. Back on the surface, the desert felt quieter than before. The helicopters never left. Extra floodlights surrounded the trench now, casting long white beams across the sand. The seam remained closed, smooth as untouched stone, but the hum beneath the ground never faded. That night, the new equipment ran continuously. Lines of data filled the screens, forming patterns that repeated in intervals too precise to be random. Layla sat beside me, staring at the graphs. "They're not signals," she said softly. "What are they?" She hesitated. "Coordinates." "Of what?" She looked toward the dark horizon, where the desert met the sky. "Depth," she whispered. "Something deeper than the structure itself." The numbers continued to climb, and beneath the plateau, far below the buried chamber, the ground shifted again, slow enough that no one outside the tent noticed. But the sensors did, because for the first time since we arrived, a second rhythm appeared beneath the hum. Not machinery, not resonance. A steady pulse rising from the darkness below. The decision to run a full activation test came just before midnight. No meeting, no discussion. Just a quiet instruction delivered through the newcomers' radios and repeated to Halim like it had already been approved weeks ago. Increase power to the monitoring array, synchronize all sensors, record everything. Halim didn't look happy about it. "We don't know what it does when fully energized," he said, standing beside the equipment racks as engineers adjusted settings. The tall man from the helicopters gave a thin smile. "That's why we're here." Outside, the desert wind dragged long ribbons of sand across the floodlights. The trench looked deeper at night, darker, like a wound that refused to close. Layla stood near the edge with her tablet, eyes flicking between the seismic readings and the sky. "It's already reacting," she murmured. The hum beneath the ground had changed again. It wasn't just a vibration anymore. It rose and fell like a slow breath. At 0017, the power increase began. Generators roared to life, feeding current into the unfamiliar equipment. Lines of blue light crawled across the sensor modules, syncing in perfect rhythm. On the screens, the chamber's internal cameras flickered back on. The pillars inside were brighter now, their geometric patterns pulsing in waves that climbed toward the ceiling. Dust drifted upward as if gravity had loosened its grip. Then the seam opened. Not gradually, not cautiously, It unfolded in a smooth, deliberate motion, the stone plates retracting into the walls with a low mechanical sigh. The shaft below glowed faintly, and for the first time since we arrived, a thin column of pale light rose from the depths, narrow at first, then widening as the power climbed. No one spoke. The newcomers watched the screens with clinical focus. Layla's fingers tightened around her tablet. "It's aligning with something," she said. "With what?" I asked. She shook her head. "Not sure, but the signal isn't staying here." The drone launched automatically, descending into the open chamber as the activation sequence continued. Data streamed faster now. Seismic waves, electromagnetic spikes, patterns that repeated with unnerving precision. When the drone reached the intermediate platform, something new appeared. Thin lines of light ran along the pillars like veins awakening beneath stone skin. The patterns pulsed outward, converging toward the massive structure far below. The camera angled downward. The opening in the structure, the one we'd seen earlier, was fully open now, and inside, the drifting particles had thickened into a slow-moving spiral. The hum deepened into a layered tone that vibrated through the camp above, rattling metal frames and sending fine sand sliding down the trench walls. "Power at 70%, one engineer called out. The tall man nodded once. "Hold it there." But the system didn't hold. The sensors flared, readings climbing despite the commands. Lines of code scrolled across screens too quickly to follow. "It's pulling energy," Layla said. "Not receiving. Pulling." The newcomers exchanged a glance. For the first time, uncertainty crossed their faces. Inside the chamber, the pillars flashed in rapid succession. The drone's camera caught movement far below, not mechanical, not structural. The massive, curved panels of the buried structure shifted slightly, opening seams that bled thin threads of light into the darkness. The spiral inside the opening tightened. Then something passed through it. Not a shape, not a body, just a distortion. A ripple that bent the light around it as it moved upward through the shaft. The drone's signal crackled. Audio filled with a low, layered resonance. Multiple tones stacked together like distant voices speaking in perfect synchronization. One of the engineers ripped off his headset. "That's not interference." Layla stared at the waveform. "It's patterned," she whispered. "Deliberate." The distortion reached the intermediate platform and paused. Every screen in the operations tent flickered simultaneously. For a heartbeat, all the data flattened into a single horizontal line. Then it surged back, and the pulse beneath the ground, the second rhythm we'd detected earlier, grew stronger. The activation test should have stopped there. It didn't. The tall man gave a sharp order. "Increase power to full." Halim stepped forward. "No, we don't know what—" "It's already responding," the man cut in. "We finish this now." Power surged again. The column of light inside the shaft widened, spilling over the chamber floor like liquid glass. Sand around the trench vibrated violently, collapsing small ridges into the pit. The drone lost altitude suddenly, its stabilizers failing as the air itself seemed to thicken. And then the distortion rose higher, passing the drone, moving toward the chamber ceiling. Every floodlight around the trench flickered. Above us, the desert sky seemed darker, not clouded, just heavy, as if the air carried weight. Layla grabbed my arm. "Look." The monitors displayed a new feed. Satellite telemetry streaming through the unfamiliar equipment. Lines of coordinates appeared across the screen, forming a grid that extended far beyond the excavation site. The same patterns etched into the pillars now mapped themselves across the desert in faint, glowing lines. "It's projecting," she said. "Projecting what?" She didn't answer, because at that moment, the distortion reached the seam, and the hum stopped. Silence fell so abruptly it felt like pressure had been ripped away. The column of light collapsed inward, vanishing into the shaft. Every screen went dark. The generators outside sputtered once, then fell into a low idle. No one moved. No one breathed. The system rebooted slowly. One by one, screens flickered back to life. The drone feed returned first, hovering just above the intermediate platform, its lights dim but stable. The chamber below looked unchanged, the pillars dark, the opening in the structure closed again, as if nothing had happened. But the sensors told a different story. Depth readings spiked far beyond the structure's lowest point, numbers plunging downward into measurements no one had recorded before. Layla's voice was barely audible. "There's another chamber beneath it." The tall man leaned closer to the screen. "How deep?" She hesitated. Too deep for this to be natural. Outside, a faint tremor rolled through the desert, barely strong enough to move the sand. The pulse beneath the ground returned, slower now, steadier, and somewhere far below the structure we had uncovered, something else had shifted. Later, long after the activation test ended, I walked to the edge of the trench alone. The seam had closed again, smooth and silent. The helicopter's lights blinked steadily in the distance, their crews still watching, still waiting. Layla joined me without a word. "They didn't tell us everything," she said. "No," I replied. She looked down into the darkness. Whatever this place is, it wasn't built to send signals outward. What was it built for? Her answer came after a long pause. To wake something up. The ground vibrated once, faint but unmistakable. Not from the chamber, from deeper. No one slept after the activation test. The camp stayed lit through the early hours, generators idling low, engineers whispering over half-working screens. Even the newcomers, the ones who had arrived like they owned the desert, moved more quietly now. Whatever they expected to happen, it hadn't been this. At 3:42, the deeper scan finished processing. Layla pulled me into the operations tent before anyone else could speak. The display showed a vertical slice of the earth beneath the structure, layers of rock descending far beyond the known chamber. But beneath the curved construct we had uncovered, another shape appeared. Not a room, not a cavern, a void, perfectly symmetrical, stretching downward like an inverted tower carved through bedrock itself. "How deep?" I asked. She swallowed. "We can't reach the bottom. The signal fades at nearly 2 kilometers. 2 kilometers. Nothing in ancient Egypt, nothing in any known civilization could have built that." The tall man entered the tent moments later, flanked by 2 of the helicopter crew. He studied the scan in silence. "Prepare a descent," he said finally. Halim shook his head. "The structure just shut itself down. We don't even know if it's stable." "It's stable enough," the man replied. We go deeper before whatever that was decides to start again. By dawn, the chamber had been reopened. The seam parted with the same quiet precision, revealing the shaft and the intermediate platform below. Floodlights lowered into the opening cast pale beams against the pillars, their etched patterns now completely dark. The hum remained, faint but constant. Layla insisted on coming down with the drone team. So did I. The lift descended slowly, cables humming under tension as the surface shrank above us. Dust swirled in thin ribbons through the beam of our lamps. When we reached the intermediate platform, the air felt colder than before. The opening in the deeper structure lay ahead, a curved archway just wide enough for two people to walk through. The metallic surface looked ancient and untouched, but the edges carried faint scratches, as if something had moved through it long ago. The drone slipped ahead first, scanning the tunnel beyond. Its feed appeared on Layla's tablet. A sloping passage descended into darkness, smooth walls, no visible tool marks, faint geometric seams that glowed briefly when the drone's light struck them. Same patterns as the pillars, she said, but older somehow. We moved forward. The tunnel angled downward in a steady spiral, each turn revealing more of the impossible architecture beneath Saqqara. No dust, no debris, just silence, and that distant pulse, slow and deliberate. After nearly 20 minutes, the passage opened into a vast circular chamber. I stopped at the threshold. The scale was wrong, far larger than the upper chamber, its walls curving upward into shadows beyond our lights. At the center stood a ring of massive vertical plates, each one tilted inward, forming a hollow core that extended downward into a black shaft. The air vibrated faintly. Layla's voice barely carried across the chamber. This isn't a room. She walked closer, scanning the plates. It's a containment structure. The words hung in the air. The newcomers arrived moments later, their boots echoing softly on the stone. The tall man stared at the central ring, his confidence finally gone. What was contained? One of the engineers whispered. As if answering the question, the pulse beneath us shifted, faster now, uneven. The plates began to glow, not bright, just a faint internal light spreading across their surfaces like veins waking beneath skin. The drone hovered over the central shaft, its camera angled downward. At first, there was nothing but darkness. Then the distortion appeared again, not rising this time, moving, slowly circling beneath the structure, bending the light around it like heat rippling above desert sand. Layla stepped back. It's still here, she said. What is? I asked. She shook her head. Not what? Something that isn't supposed to exist this close to the surface. The plates brightened further. Lines of light connected them in a perfect ring, forming a lattice that hummed with low resonance. One of the newcomers shouted into his radio. Power surge detected, but it's not coming from our systems. The distortion in the shaft changed direction. For a moment, the air felt heavier, pressing against my chest. And then the pulse aligned. Every plate flashed once, sharp and blinding. And the hum became a layered tone that filled the chamber like a choir singing beneath stone. The distortion moved upward, not escaping, returning to its position at the center of the ring. The light dimmed, The plate settled back into silence. The pulse slowed again, steady, contained. Layla exhaled shakily. "It wasn't waking up," she said. "It was resealing." The tall man stared at her. "Explain." She pointed to the plates. The activation sequence triggered a response, not from the structure, but from whatever's inside it. The system reset itself. It corrected the disturbance. "You're saying we almost released it?" someone asked. Her silence was answer enough. "We left the deeper chamber an hour later. No one spoke on the ascent. When we reached the surface, the desert looked unchanged, wind dragging lines across the sand, helicopters idling under the morning sun. But the camp felt different, quieter, smaller. The newcomers packed their equipment without argument. The generators shut down one by one, leaving only the natural hum beneath the ground, faint, steady, patient. Before she left, Layla stood at the edge of the trench with me. "They'll bury it," she said. "Seal everything. Pretend this was just another excavation. Will that stop it?" She looked toward the horizon, where the sun burned through the haze. "I think it already stopped itself." She hesitated, then added quietly, "Whatever built this place didn't come here to communicate. They came here to lock something away." The seam closed for the final time that afternoon, stone plates sliding together until no trace of the chamber remained. As the last helicopter lifted into the sky, the ground vibrated once beneath my feet. A slow, measured pulse. Not waking, not sleeping, waiting.